Hi, and welcome. My name is Julie Rogers, and I am the host of the Fistula Free Podcast. Welcome to episode 1. On this episode, I'd like to start by sharing a little bit of my experience, strength, and hope, which includes decades of living with Crohn's disease, the diagnosis of a super complex fistula, and my ongoing determination to improve my overall health and well-being while searching for a cure. My purpose for starting this podcast is to help as many people as I can find a cure from this debilitating disease. Remove the stigma of living with a fistula, educate people who are not familiar with what a fistula is, and the toll that it takes on those who suffer from this debilitating disease. My upcoming guests are people from around the world who have suffered with some form of a fistula and are here to share their healing journey, the obstacles they had to overcome, how they overcame them, and how their pure determination led them to find Healing Hands Clinic. I would like to start off by sharing one of my favorite quotes. In good health, we have 1,000 dreams. In sickness, we have only one. This could not be more true. I will start my story at the age of 23. I was truly living the life of my dreams. I was a flight attendant for a major airline and traveling the world. I was recently married and back home living in Seattle. Life was good. I was running and doing all the things that I loved. But one day, out of the blue, I started having severe digestive issues, where I would have to go to the bathroom almost immediately after eating anything. I had major cramping and blood in my stool. It didn't take long to end up in the doctor's office with a million questions as to what was going on. Life as I knew it seemed to change overnight. The symptoms seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, but as I know now from my years of Ayurvedic studies, disease starts to manifest years before any signs or symptoms present themselves. I ended up finding a great GI doctor in Seattle who helped me get to the bottom of things, literally. At the time, I was flying overseas internationally to Japan and had been eating a lot of sushi. So my first thoughts were that I may have encountered some sort of bug. How I wished that was all it was. But more tests and a colonoscopy would reveal that I had ulcerative colitis, a form of IBD, something I knew nothing about. My doctor started me on a treatment plan right away in which medications were at the forefront of that plan. Back then, in the early 90s, diet and nutrition were not even talked about as being a contributing factor. Prednisone, a steroid, and sulfasalazine were the most prescribed medications when looking at calming down the inflammation and seeking any sort of relief. When those failed to work, I was advised to see a surgeon that would be able to discuss options that could bring me some kind of relief. That was in 1995. And after being sick and tired of being sick and tired, I took a leap of faith and opted to have a procedure which is most referred to as J-pouch surgery. It is most often used to treat chronic UC and those who carry a greater risk of developing colon and rectal cancer. At the time, I didn't know a lot of my family's medical history, but I did know enough that my maternal grandmother had passed away of colon cancer in her early 50s, when I was just 3 years old. Given all these factors, I was a prime candidate for this procedure, which allows you to eliminate waste normally after removal of your large intestine. During J-pouch surgery, the entire colon and rectum are removed, preserving the sphincter muscles. They will then construct a pouch shaped like the letter J from the end of the small intestine and attach it to the anus, constructing a temporary opening in the abdominal wall. An ileostomy is then created for eliminating waste while the internal healing occurs. After about 3 months of healing, the surgeon does a second procedure to close the ileostomy, reconnecting everything internally, allowing for stool to pass normally. After 6 months, I was completely healed and functioning normally. Freedom from my disease at this point had been restored, and I was able to go back to living a normal life. I did very well for a long time, but looking back, I feel as though I took for granted my restored sense of health. And eventually in 2009, I started developing symptoms of a perianal abscess, which is a collection of pus in the tissues around the anus and rectum. At the time, I had no idea what that was, but it was very painful. I was now living in Pittsburgh and commuting to New York City. I remember sitting in a window seat on my way to work thinking, I can't do this. It hurt to sit. I was in so much pain. How was I going to do this? It was a huge red flag that something was seriously wrong. I called off my trip and went back home in search of a new doctor. I went through the gauntlet of tests, including an MRI, which would reveal my biggest fear. that I did in fact have an abscess that had formed. I was then sent home with a new diagnosis of Crohn's disease, with an abscess and the recommendation to start Remicade. Remicade was one of the first biologics on the market used for the treatment of moderate to severe active Crohn's and colitis. It is in no way a cure and has serious side effects in which the risks and benefits should be carefully considered prior to initiating therapy. But I was desperate and willing to try anything that might work. Crohn's disease and UC have a lot in common, including long-term inflammation in your digestive system, but they have key differences such as location. Ulcerative colitis affects only the large intestine, but with Crohn's, it can appear anywhere from the mouth to the anus. Also, with Crohn's, you will have healthy areas in between inflamed areas, whereas with UC, there are no healthy areas in between. Because Crohn's affects more of the GI tract, there are more signs and symptoms that appear in people with Crohn's. According to the Mayo Clinic, Crohn's disease is a type of inflammatory bowel disease. When the disease is active, it causes inflammation of the tissues in your digestive tract, which can lead to abdominal pain, severe diarrhea, fatigue, blood in your stool, weight loss, and malnutrition. Inflammation caused by Crohn's disease can involve different areas of the digestive tract in different people, most commonly the small intestine. This inflammation often spreads into the deeper layers of the bowel. The onset of IBD is typically between the ages of 15 and 35. As I mentioned before, there are many complications, and one of those complications is the development of an abscess. In the event the abscess is drained and does not heal properly, over time a fistula can form, which is what happened in my case. Fistulas may form between loops of bowel in the bladder, vagina, or through the skin, causing continuous drainage. An anal fistula is a tunnel that develops between the inside of the anus and the outside skin around the anus. The anus is the muscular opening at the end of the digestive tract where stool exits the body. But fistulas can also develop between different body parts, such as between your intestine and your skin, or between your intestine and another organ. There are 3 types of fistulas. Anorectal fistula, which occurs between the anal canal and the skin around the anal opening. Rectovaginal or anovaginal fistula, which occurs when a hole develops between the rectum or anus and the vagina. Colovaginal fistula occurs between the colon and the vagina. When a fistula develops inside the abdomen, it may lead to infections and abscesses, which are collections of pus. The symptoms of an anal fistula can include an opening on the skin around the anus, a red inflamed area around the tunnel opening, oozing of pus, blood, or stool from the tunnel opening, pain in the rectum and anus, especially when sitting or passing stool, and the possible onset of fever. The exact cause remains unknown, but several key factors are likely to play a role. Those include the immune system, diet, heredity, and environmental factors, just to name a few. There is currently no cure for Crohn's, and the options for dealing with the fistula are limited and largely ineffective. I know many people who have been through many surgeries and treatments without success. It is noted that 35 to 50% of Crohn's disease patients will develop a fistula. Taking this into account, the people who suffer from this disease, which has been categorized as an autoimmune disorder, given no cure, are sometimes left to succumb to living with many challenging circumstances and the never-ending trial of biologics and surgeries that will hopefully at some point lead to relief from their symptoms or remission. Obstacles to healing include, first and foremost, believing that you deserve to heal and that you are not your diagnosis, as well as finding the right doctors to support you and your overall healing. Financial aspects are a significant barrier to treatment. Treatments and surgeries can be very costly and insurance may not cover the costs. Or you are left waiting endlessly for approval. As your condition advances, it disrupts more and more of your life, including loss of income due to the inability to work. Finding a good support system of people who understand what you are going through is crucial to navigating this journey. Over the years and through all of this, I continued to work as a flight attendant and have always kept a positive attitude. I somehow continued to work, travel, and even managed to run a few marathons. I've been open and willing to try new things as well as continually changing my diet. I've made the effort to stay connected with others who share the same struggles and made it a point to join support groups such as the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America and a variety of Facebook groups that have surfaced over the years that offer a different level of support for people who are looking for not only support, but as a sounding board for ideas and insight into what others have gone through or tried in reaching some sense of normality in their lives. When I developed a fistula due to my Crohn's disease, it was a wake-up call to the severity of my disease. Crohn's, and more so the fistula, had taken total control over my life and became an underlying factor in all my decisions. For a long time, fistulas have remained marginalized by the medical community. Fistulas, although non-life-threatening, are challenging to treat by even the most experienced medical practitioners. As with any disease, the body tries to fight and repair it. But if these attempts by the body to heal itself fail, the fistula may become chronic and almost impossible to treat without some sort of surgical intervention. And no number of medications can cure it because it needs physical repair. There is also a lot of shame attached to living with an anorectal condition, especially that of a fistula. Due to the stigma and embarrassment that surrounds this disease, I hid my struggles, the pain, and the pure hell I was living with in trying to manage this life-altering diagnosis. Over the years, it drained my body's resources and took on a life of its own. Anyone who is living with a fistula knows how debilitating living with Crohn's and a fistula can be. In the case of a complex fistula, surgical intervention is necessary if your goal is to be cured. In traditional medicine, a common surgical intervention is placing a special drain called a seton, which remains in place for at least 6 weeks. After a seton is placed, a second operation is almost always performed, such as a fistulotomy, a lift procedure, or an advanced flap procedure. In 2015, I had my first seton placement and a new biologic by the name of Cimzia. I would then have a second seton placement in the year of 2017. Neither of these seton placements or surgeries helped and only hindered whatever sense of normality I had left. After exhausting the traditional medical approach, including 3 different biologics, Remicade, Cimzia, and Humira, 6-MP, the antibiotic ciprofloxacin, and 2 seton placement surgeries to address my fistula and abscesses, I opted to try a holistic way forward. I stopped all medications, and over the span of the next few years, given my determination and hope to find relief and a cure, I continued to search for other viable options. I radically changed my diet to a plant-based diet. I started to go to acupuncture once a week. I was continuing my running, yoga, and meditation. I sought out an Ayurvedic practitioner who was able to help me dial in my herbs and supplements. I set up a morning routine that I still practice to this day. I also at one point did a 5-day detox panchakarma treatment as well as stem cell therapy and hyperbaric oxygen. My determination was starting to pay off, and with this new focus over time, I started to feel better. The progress was slow, but eventually I started to see the results for my Crohn's. But my fistula was still rearing its ugly head. Those of you familiar with or living with a fistula know they have a mind of their own. One day it seems to be healing and you feel better, to waking up the next morning in excruciating pain. In 2018, my husband and I moved from Arizona back to our hometown of Seattle. As grateful as we were to be back in our home state and around family, this would present its own challenges. I was once again looking for a new doctor, one that would support my holistic view on managing my Crohn's and fistula. The fistula had now become my number one focus. Most often, biologics are prescribed, which rarely work in curing a fistula, especially in complex cases in which some sort of surgical intervention must take place. All the lifestyle choices and changes I had made up until that time had been working, and my Crohn's was in remission, but still had not addressed the fistula. It was still raging a war inside my body. My new doctor ran his own tests, and an MRI revealed I had at least 3 tracts that were now visible and draining from the skin around the anus, which is the nature of a fistula. Finding the fistula's internal opening inside the anal canal is more complicated. Knowing the complete path of an anal fistula is important for effective treatment. The abscesses were very painful and would intermittently fill with pus and need to be drained. Although not life-threatening, it can be dangerous to not address an abscess. It is important to seek medical attention right away and have them drained, as they may cause infection and in extreme cases may cause sepsis. It was a year later in 2019, and due to the magnitude of symptoms and the toll the fistula was taking on my body, I opted to put in for short-term disability through my company. That way I would be able to focus all my time and what energy I had left on getting my health and life back on track. I had given up so much already due to this disease. I wasn't running as much or registering for any races. I was afraid to travel for the fear of having a flare-up. And life as I knew it had once again become very unmanageable. Then COVID hit. I was already off on short-term disability. The airlines were struggling and my company had decided to offer one-year leaves. But they didn't stop there, and in August of 2020, I was given the opportunity to retire from my career as a flight attendant. Due to COVID, they decided to offer a very good retirement package targeted at those employees who were senior in the company. I was one of those senior people, having had just crossed my 29-year anniversary with the company. It was a once-in-a-lifetime offer, and given where I was at in my life and my determination to continue to get my health in order, I took the retirement and have never looked back. My retirement gave me the opportunity to focus on my health full-time, and knowing I couldn't continue to suffer in silence, I reached back out to my GI doctor. He directed me to a local surgeon, one that I was told might be able to help me. But to my disbelief, I was turned away until I had given biologics one more try and had exhausted all other possibilities. My doctor supported my holistic view and knew that I had been off any type of medication for years. However, he still suggested I try Remicade one more time. His reason being that it had been years since I had last tried a biologic, and with everything else I was doing, it just might work. I still had many reservations about taking this route again, as I had already been down the road years before with no success. He assured me that outside of having other surgeries and with the possible dire outcome of having an ostomy bag for the rest of my life, that this was the only option I had left. I have always lived a very active lifestyle, and I seriously didn't envision my life living the rest of my life with an ostomy bag. I continued to struggle, yet I was determined to live my life. I had somehow managed to live with this fistula for 12 years, and I was not going to let it interfere with living out my dreams. In October of 2021, I left for a yoga teacher training in Costa Rica. I was there for just 2 weeks before my fistula reared its ugly head again and left me with no choice but to cut my trip short and return home. It was yet another wake-up call to the toll this devastating disease was playing in my life. It had become the ultimate deciding factor in everything I did. It was a hard decision to make, but I returned home. I made a call to my GI doctor and made plans to start biologics. I decided to give it a try, putting my doubt aside with the thinking that if I did do this along with all the other wellness practices I was doing, it just might work. I continued to stay positive and continue on my healing journey. At the same time, my husband and I had started talking about moving to Costa Rica. It was a dream of ours, but we had huge reservations about the move because I wasn't sure how or if I would be able to manage my now very complex fistula in another country. So we sidelined our plan. I continued to stay very vigilant with all my health and wellness practices, as I had quite a large toolbox that I had created over the years in which to pull from. Looking back, I believe that if I hadn't continued with those lifestyle practices, I would have been much worse off than I was. Staying active played a big role in my state of mental health, as well as contributing to the low level of inflammation I was experiencing. My overall health was excellent, outside of the fistula, but one thing still held true. I remained determined to do everything in my power to find a solution. This is where the story gets good and very emotional for me. Despite my reservations of taking any sort of biologic again, in March of 2022, I received my first loading dose of Remicade with no issues. My next infusion was to be given 2 weeks later. During my ongoing research, and just a few days before I was to receive my second infusion of Remicade, I had come across a clinic in India. The name of the clinic was Healing Hands Clinic. Healing Hands was founded by Dr. Ashwin Porwal alongside his wife, Dr. Snehal Porwal, who also runs the Healing Hands Foundation. I continued my research, and the more I read, the more intrigued I became. Dr. Porwal is one of the top proctologists in India, and he has treated hundreds of fistula patients to date. Anal fistulas are one of the most challenging to treat, as reoccurrences are quite common. However, this is where the expertise and innovation of Dr. Porwal comes into play with his development of the DLPL distal laser proximal ligation procedure. It is an innovative sphincter saving technique. This technique ensures complete recovery and has a negligible chance of recurrence. This procedure has also been shown to have faster healing, minimal complications, and a quicker return to normalcy for the patient. In most fistula cases, after surgery, there is a 30% chance or greater for recurrence. With DLPL, it has shown a mere 1 to 2% recurrence rate. All patients are thoroughly followed until complete cure. Not only is this procedure safe, minimally invasive, it is a cure for complex fistulas. DLPL is performed under the guidance of a 3D endo-anal imaging machine that can identify hidden fistula tracts and microabscess in real time during surgery. After reading, researching, and talking to former and current patients who had traveled to India to Healing Hands Clinic in Pune, undergone this procedure, and were now cured from this debilitating, life-altering disease, it was as if an entirely new possibility had appeared overnight. With this information in my back pocket, I returned to the hospital for my second infusion of Remicade. Halfway through the infusion, I had a severe allergic reaction. I immediately had them stop the infusion and was given a high dose of Benadryl. My husband Andy was alerted to what had happened and that he was needed to pick me up as I could not drive due to the large dose of Benadryl given. I will never forget the moment Andy pulled up and I got in the car. He said, "Let me guess, we're going to India." After all these years, the hope of finding a cure was still alive. I couldn't wait to get home and start planning our trip. It was March 25th, 2022, when I first contacted Healing Hands Clinic. I had emailed Dr. Porwal regarding my current medical condition, wanting to know the next steps I should take if he thought that he could help me. He responded to me that same day, saying that he understood my pain and that he had seen a large series of Crohn's and fistula patients who were successfully treated by his DLPL technique. And further, gave me the doctor point of contact who looks after the international patients and complex Crohn's cases. I wasted no time and reached out to Dr. Lena right away, again with a response within the day. A whole new path had unfolded before my eyes, and I was more determined than ever to make it to India. I had never been there before, so I had 1,000 questions, or so it seemed. Even with all my years as a flight attendant, I had never traveled to India. I came to think of this as my healing pilgrimage and went about it as such, taking care and planning each step with the help of Dr. Lena, who at the time was my point of contact at Healing Hands. She was more than helpful in answering any questions I had and went over all the details of my medical records that I had from previous blood work and MRIs. She assured me I was in the best hands, and I believed her. My procedure date was scheduled for July 6th, which gave me just over 4 months to prepare. It proved to be plenty of time to book flights, transportation, lodging, and get my passport and visa in order. Because I was traveling to India for a medical procedure, that meant I needed a letter of medical necessity from Healing Hands Clinic. Everything had gone very smoothly, and my husband and I had arrived in Pune a couple days before my procedure. The initial intake was scheduled for the day prior, in which I met Dr. Porwal, and he performed the 3D endo-anal scope. The procedure would reveal that I had a type 5 supercomplex horseshoe fistula with 5 external openings. A lot of times fistulas are not diagnosed properly because of the complex anatomy and limited diagnostic options. MRIs are one of the most common techniques, but may not give an accurate picture of the current disease. The 3D endo-anal scope is a patient-friendly procedure that can also be used in real time during a procedure and gives valuable detailed information that is helpful in order to minimize damage to the anal sphincter. After enduring a 4-hour procedure under anesthesia and a spinal block, the next few weeks would proved to be a bit daunting as I navigated the initial healing process that included 2 to 3 cleanings and follow-ups per week, pain management, sitz baths, hydration, nutrition, and learning to logistically navigate a new country and a new culture. It was all a bit overwhelming to say the least, but I was on my healing pilgrimage and determined to make the most of it and do everything in my power to hear the words cured. I really got to know the staff and Dr. Porwal's team at Healing Hands Clinic. The level of skill, compassion, and commitment were unlike anything I had ever experienced in the U.S. During my first cleaning, 2 days after my initial procedure, they played the song Julie from a 1975 Bollywood film entitled Julie. We all laughed, and it made what was an uncomfortable, very painful cleaning a lot more manageable. Through my time at Healing Hands Clinic, I met several other international patients from around the world who had the same determination that I did. They had traveled to India in faith that they too would be cured of this debilitating disease and be able to go back to living a life fistula-free. It was great to find support and connect with other people who were battling similar journeys. As the days went by and the pain lessened, I started to feel more and more at home in Pune. I was able to start running again and was able to visit some of the places around the city, such as the Ganesh Temple and Parvati Hill, just to name a few. I was also able to take a trip to the Hilton Shalim, located in the Western Ghat Mountains, for some additional healing time that would prove to be very beneficial. I was healing very well and I was getting closer to going home. And to my surprise, my husband had made the decision to fly back to Pune from the U.S. to celebrate with me. His overall commitment and support to my health and healing were unwavering. We spent the last week in Pune enjoying India and the people and places I had come to love. On September 5th, I was given Dr. Porwal's words of confidence, assuring me that I was cured. Hearing the words cured after 13 years of living with a fistula was very surreal and hard to believe. Many tears of joy and gratitude were shed in the days that followed. This also meant it was time for cake. My friend John from Australia had celebrated his cure with a cake before he went home, and I was looking forward to doing the same. In fact, it was my goal to get my cake before I went home. Funny, as it never was about the cake, it was about what the cake symbolized: freedom from fistula. I ended up being in Pune under the care of Dr. Porwal for a total of 10 weeks. During my time there, I also had the pleasure to meet Dr. Snehal, who not only runs the Healing Hands Foundation, but personally invests her time and energy to the fistula-free movement, and is instrumental in supporting all the incoming international patients coming to Healing Hands Clinic. Not only have I been cured of my super complex type 5 fistula, I'm a part of the Healing Hands family, and I can clearly see where their motto, curing with care, comes from. I've been home from India going on 5 months now, and I'm doing very well. I feel good, and I have a new lease on life. My anxiety has vanished, and the thoughts that used to consume me every time I left the house have diminished greatly. I'm back to trail running, and my husband and I have been able to make future travel plans that have been put on hold for many years. And we are now planning our move to Costa Rica this September. I'm incredibly grateful to Dr. Porwal and the team at Healing Hands for giving me my life back. With this new lease on life, I feel as though it's my mission to help as many people as I can find freedom from fistula. And remember, we can overcome so much more than we think we are capable of. Thank you for listening to the Fistula Free Podcast. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out and stay tuned for episode 2 coming soon.